Have you ever been humiliated by your own family? On the very day of our most significant family celebration, I was thrown out of my father's anniversary party simply because I looked too modest for their lavish lifestyle. I stood at the restaurant door when my sister said, "This place is only for the successful." But no one even guessed who actually owned that restaurant. What happened next changed my family forever. My name is Catherine Elizabeth Reynolds, and I am 30 years old. On that day, I was getting ready for my dad's anniversary. He was turning 60. My father is a stubborn and hardworking man. He started as a regular laborer on construction sites in Lefortovo, earning pennies, then became a foreman, opened his own company, and now he is the owner of a construction holding company, a respected man in Moscow. He has always dreamed of stability and prosperity, so that his children would never need for anything. Our childhood was simple. We lived in a small 3-room apartment in Sokol with ordinary Soviet furniture. For holidays, my mom would make Olivier salad and herring under a fur coat. In the summer, the family would go to our dacha near Dmitrov. Everything changed when my father's business flourished. My parents moved to an elite residential complex on Leningrad Sky, got a car with a personal driver, and my mom dyed her hair blonde and got seriously into fashion and restaurants. My sister Victoria graduated from the law faculty of Moscow State University. Now she is a star at one of the major law firms. Her husband is a financier. Their children attend a prestigious gymnasium, and their vacations are only abroad. My brother Alexander is a plastic surgeon who works in a private clinic, and his wife is a fitness trainer. They live in a residential complex in Rublevka. Endless parties, expensive cars. I was always on the other pole. In school, I loved reading and dreaming, not striving for Olympiads. I valued walks around VDNH and conversations about life more. After university, the economic faculty of MGPU, not MGU, of course, which my mom never missed an opportunity to poke at, I worked for a couple of years in a bank. The corporate culture felt alien to me. Intrigues, pointless reports, burnout. Every morning, dreading the commute to the office. I quit. It shocked my parents. I said I got a job at the library, a simpler choice. Nobody bothers me with unnecessary questions. Everyone thinks I'm a failure. And, to be honest, I was fine with it. For the last 3 years now, I've been running my own IT company. We develop online programs for schools, collaborate with regions, have received grants and serious funding. I invested some of the earned money into real estate, buying a share in a business center in the center of Moscow, where one of the most expensive restaurants in the city is located. By the way, this is where my dad's anniversary is being celebrated today. Naturally, the family doesn't know about it. To them, I'm still just Catherine, barely getting by and not having met their expectations. I consciously hide my real job and income. I wanted to see if my loved ones would accept me not for my grand successes, but just as a person. I've also seen how money and status change people, often not for the better. That day I woke up early. On the kitchen table was a small box with a gift from my dad, an old Victory watch. He often reminisced about such watches, which he received as a graduation gift back in school. He cherished them for a long time until they were stolen at his first construction site. Since then, he hadn't seen another like it and regretted losing them. I had spent a long time searching for a similar one through collectors, and finally found one almost identical, nearly new. In front of the mirror, I pondered what to wear. My wardrobe includes fancier and more solid things. But I chose a simple black dress, pearl earrings from my grandmother, and a modest silver bracelet. I tied my hair back in a ponytail and applied light makeup. I was used to being invisible at family gatherings. It's calmer that way. While waiting for a taxi, my best friend Sophia called, the only person who knew the truth. Ready for the festive battle? She asked with irony. I don't know, Sophia. There will be the same endless talks about business, success, and when I will get married. I replied. But now you're not just the director, but also the co-owner of the coolest restaurant in Moscow. She laughed. Just hold your ground and don't give them any details. I laughed too, but inside I felt restless. I took the box with the watch, threw on my coat, and stepped outside. The day was just starting, but my head was already buzzing like after a sleepless night. Outside, it was drizzling, cars honked in a jam, and I stood at the entrance thinking, what will this anniversary bring for me? And for the whole family? I arrived at the restaurant a bit earlier than the scheduled time. Outside, it was drizzling. The asphalt gleamed under the yellow lights. I stood with the gift in hand, feeling the familiar anxiety. I entered the spacious lobby of the business center, where the restaurant was located on the top floor. The waitress smiled at me and led me to the bar, where I decided to wait for my family. I ordered mineral water and spent a few minutes gazing at the evening Moscow through the glass walls. 10 minutes later, my parents appeared in the dining hall. Mom was all dressed up in a new dress, her jewelry sparkling. Her gaze was immediately evaluative. Dad looked tired but maintained a businesslike demeanor. He immediately started chatting with some acquaintances. Victoria and Alexander appeared behind them with their spouses, both in expensive suits. Victoria barely threw me a cold greeting, walking past without acknowledging my gift. Alexander patted me on the shoulder, saying, "Oh, the little one came. How's the library? Is today a day off?" I replied calmly, "All good, thank you." Mom approached me closer and whispered, "Catherine, you could have dressed a bit nicer. After all our people are here." I nodded to avoid starting an argument. When it was time to enter the banquet hall, I stood up and followed my family, who were talking among themselves a bit ahead. At the entrance to the hall, Victoria suddenly stopped short and blocked my way. She smiled a strained smile, saying, "Catherine, maybe you'd be more comfortable sitting at the bar? After all, this is an expensive restaurant, and the crowd is accordingly." I looked at her in surprise. Alexander supported his sister. "Do you really think you'll be comfortable here? It's at least 10,000 a person for dinner." Mom pressed her lips together and quietly added, "There are very important people here, Catherine. We prefer to avoid any awkwardness. Maybe you should wait until we finish dinner with the guests." I felt as if I had been drenched in cold water. Dad stood aside, pretending to be busy with a conversation and as if he hadn't heard what was happening. Other guests passed by. Some looked at me curiously as I stood at the door, holding the box with the watch. Victoria lightly nudged me toward the bar. "This isn't a place for modest people. Let's not take offense, okay?" I tried to smile, but it didn't go well. A burning sensation of humiliation filled my chest. I quietly said, "It's Dad's anniversary. I came to congratulate him." Victoria sighed. "Dad isn't in the mood for that right now, believe me. Let's better wait until it's all done." Alexander chuckled. "If anything, we'll bring you a piece of cake." I felt unnecessary, unwanted. Like I was 12 again, being thrown out the door. Mom stood beside me, looking away, pretending to have nothing to do with it. Victoria and Alexander were about to enter the hall when the restaurant administrator approached us. He warmly greeted me by name and asked if I needed assistance. I saw surprise on my sisters' and brothers' faces, but they hadn't yet figured out what was happening. I thanked the administrator and said I was waiting for the others. He nodded respectfully and walked away. Victoria immediately turned to Mom. "Did you know she's known here? Why are they greeting her like that?" Mom simply shrugged, trying to save face. I stood at the door, holding the gift, feeling as if the ground was slipping away from under me. They looked at me like I was an outsider, a poor relative invited only out of pity. I wanted to leave without waiting for the evening, but something inside stopped me. I straightened up and decided to stay. At that moment, I didn't yet know that the most interesting part was just beginning. I stood at the bar, clasping the box with the watch and trying not to reveal my hurt. The family had already settled in the banquet hall, and I was still in the passage, as if I hadn't been invited at all. Victoria kept glancing back over her shoulder, checking if I had left. Alexander was playfully whispering with his wife, and Mom pretended not to see me. Dad was busy chatting with guests, seemingly having forgotten my existence. I felt despair rising within me. It was my father's celebration, but they had literally pushed me out the door. As a few guests passed by, glancing at me with indifferent or mocking expressions, I felt like I was invisible. It seemed that this evening would solidify my role as an outsider among my own. Suddenly, a security guard appeared nearby. He looked at me thoughtfully and then very officially addressed me with respect. "Catherine Elizabeth, hello. Is everything all right? Would you like to go to your favorite table?" Voices at the neighboring tables fell silent. Victoria turned sharply around. Alexander stared at me in surprise. Mom could not hide her astonishment. I calmly replied, "Thanks, I'm fine. I'm just waiting for my family." The guard smiled and said, "If you need anything, just call. We always enjoy having you with us." He nodded and left, leaving a wave of whispers behind. At that moment, the restaurant administrator, a tall man in a strict suit, approached us. He greeted me like an old acquaintance. "Catherine Elizabeth, it's great to see you today. We always have a separate table reserved for you with the best view. If you'd like, I can personally show you." I noticed how Victoria and Alexander exchanged glances. The confusion on their faces turned into anxiety. Mom stepped closer to me and nervously asked, "Catherine, what's going on? Why are they greeting you like a VIP guest?" I calmly replied, "I often come here on business." Victoria couldn't take it anymore. "What kind of business do you have in a place like this? You're just a librarian." Alexander chuckled, but not as confidently as before. At that moment, the restaurant manager approached us. He greeted me by name and added, "Catherine Elizabeth is one of the key investors in our restaurant and the building we're in." A hush fell over the hall. The family went completely still. Guests began glancing at each other and whispering. I felt a weight lift from my chest. Victoria asked in confusion, "Is this true? You're an investor?" "Seriously?" I nodded, "Yes. I have invested part of my company's income into real estate, including here." Alexander lowered his eyes as if realizing how wrong he had been. Mom suddenly turned pale and sat down on the nearest chair. Dad slowly got up from the table and for the first time all evening looked at me with true attention. I looked at all of them and felt a mix of pain, relief, and exhaustion. The family suddenly realized that all their talks about poor Catherine were just fantasies. At that moment, the administrator invited us to a table, now taking my status into account. Victoria, unsure of what to say, mumbled, "You could have at least warned us." I replied calmly, "I didn't want to impose. For me, the most important thing is to be part of the family, not to boast." Dad came over to me and quietly said, "Come sit next to me." I took my place at the table, finally not at the edge but among my own. But inside, I felt as if this evening was just beginning for everyone. Now they would have to see me differently, and I would have to learn not to be ashamed of myself. When I sat down next to Dad, the hall fell silent for a few seconds. Victoria looked as pale as chalk, and for the first time that evening, she didn't know what to say. Alexander absently fiddled with a napkin, trying to act as if nothing significant had happened. Mom looked at me with wide eyes, as if she were trying to remember when everything could have changed so much. Dad looked confused, but there was a new seriousness in his gaze. Other guests began whispering. Some were glancing at me, some at Dad. I held the box with the watch, hesitant to give my gift after everything that had happened. It was Dad who first broke the silence. "Catherine, why have you never told us anything? Why do we always find out from outsiders?" His voice carried not only hurt, but clear surprise. I lowered my gaze and quietly said, "I just wanted to be accepted not for my position and status, but as a person. All my life, it was considered at home that success was only an external attribute. Money, connections, big names. I didn't fit into this world." Victoria finally spoke up, "But you didn't even say you have a business. We thought you barely made enough for a living, and it turns out." I interrupted her, trying to stay calm. "It was easier for me this way. No matter what you do, there's always comparison. Always. Look, Victoria is the star, Alexander is the pride. And what about Catherine? Catherine is always doing something wrong. I didn't want to be part of that anymore. Alexander looked up at me. Why did you hide? We would have supported you. I shook my head. Come on, Alexander. You always laughed at me. It was convenient for you to see me as the poor relative to joke about at the table. Mom sharply intervened, her voice trembling. Catherine, I just wanted you to have the best. I worked hard for you, for all of you. I thought that if you succeeded, then there would be respect. Then the family would be strong. I didn't realize it would hurt you. I looked her in the eyes. I didn't need anything except for a normal relationship, where I wouldn't be pushed out the door, where you would ask what I was doing, where you would just be happy for me, not ridicule me. At this moment, Dad quietly asked, shall we step out to the terrace and talk? We need to sort things out. I stood up, feeling my hands tremble slightly. Victoria watched in silence. Alexander turned to the window. Dad and I stepped onto the spacious glass terrace. Below, evening Moscow glittered. Cars slowly crawled along the garden ring. Dad remained silent for a long time, leaning on the railing, then spoke. I lived for work all these years, wanting to give you and your mom everything. I forgot that children need not only an apartment and education, but warmth as well. You're right. I really missed a lot. I felt a lump in my throat as Dad looked at me very carefully. Catherine, you helped me with the surgery. I couldn't understand where the money came from. Now it's clear. I nodded. Yes, that was me. You wouldn't have accepted it if you had known, he said softly. Dad smiled quietly. Maybe I wouldn't have accepted it, because I was a fool. I smiled through my tears. Dad hugged me tightly, truly, like he once did in my childhood. I'm sorry, Catherine, he said. I didn't see the most important things. I forgave you a long time ago, Dad, I replied. I just missed you around sometimes. We stood a bit longer in silence. Then I suddenly felt lighter inside. I sensed that this night changed something in us, in the family, in myself. I didn't know if the others could truly understand and accept me, but now I was no longer afraid to be myself. Ahead lay a long conversation with Mom, and probably with Victoria. But most importantly, the conversation with Dad finally took place. I could return to the table as a different person. When Dad and I returned to the table, the atmosphere in the hall was completely different. Guests were trying to behave tactfully, but each wanted to look at me one more time, now with new interest. Victoria and Alexander sat silently, glued to their phones, seemingly trying to hide from the conversation. Mom appeared distinctly nervous, fidgeting with her ring and pretending to write something on her phone. I took my place again, but this time I felt different, not like a guest, nor a poor relative, but as a full member of the family. Dad sat next to me, placed his hand on my shoulder, and quietly said, I'm proud of you, Catherine. I barely held back tears, but I managed to smile back at him. Mom finally mustered the courage to speak. Catherine, I didn't know it was all like this. I'm sorry if I was ever unfair. I calmly looked at her. I don't need apologies. I just want to be seen as a person, not as a project to be fixed. Victoria loudly put her phone down. Well, you could have warned us. Here we are living in one Moscow, and you have a completely different life. I shrugged. Each of us was building our own lives. Victoria, you were successful in your own way. Alexander in his way. I in mine. Alexander finally lifted his gaze. I genuinely thought you were unhappy. Sometimes I even pitied you. I smirked. You pity those you don't really know. It was convenient for you to see me as a failure. Suddenly, Dad added, you know, kids, I didn't notice how we all drifted apart, became strangers to each other. I lived my whole life thinking the main thing was to give you a start, a stable life. But it turned out I missed out on simple human warmth. Mom weakly smiled. I always wanted you to have stability, family, confidence, but it seems my control only pushed you away. I looked at my parents and for the first time in a long while felt we could speak openly. Victoria sighed. Honestly, I was sometimes envious of you. You always had something of your own. I seemed to do everything right, but there was less and less joy. Alexander thoughtfully said, I spent so much time trying to prove I was better than others. But for what? I don't understand. I smiled. Maybe it's time to stop comparing ourselves with one another. We are family, after all. Dad nodded. Let's try to start over. Maybe not from scratch, but at least honestly. At that moment, the waiters began to bring the cake. Guests gathered around to congratulate Dad, take photos, and wish him all the best. I watched the bustle and felt the tension gradually leaving. Dad raised a glass and quietly said to me, Thank you for coming, Catherine. Thank you for not leaving when they told you to. I smiled. I had waited too long for that. Mom gently hugged me around the shoulders. Let's go to the dacha together tomorrow. Walk, talk. I nodded. Of course, Mom. Victoria suggested taking a family photo for the first time in many years. Alexander took out his phone and joked, Now we definitely have our VIP in the family. I laughed, but this time without bitterness. I felt peaceful inside. I knew that things would never be the same as before, but perhaps now we could all find the strength to change. When the evening ended, Dad walked me to the exit. Almost no cars were left outside. The rain had stopped, and Moscow seemed especially beautiful. I turned to Dad. Thank you for the conversation. He hugged me tightly and said, Everything will be different now, daughter. I walked along the sidewalk to the parking lot, sensing that some burden was lifting from within, and ahead lay a completely new life. 6 months have passed since that very evening that turned my entire life upside down. I still sometimes catch myself thinking that all this didn't happen to me. But every time the family gathers together, even just to have tea at the dacha, I realize that the changes are real. We have indeed grown closer. I can't say everything is perfect. Each of us has retained our habits, vulnerabilities, and our small and big fears. But now we speak honestly with each other. Victoria no longer ribs me at every opportunity. Alexander has stopped competing over who is more successful, who has the more expensive car, or who has the longer vacation. Dad seems to have become gentler. Mom has started listening instead of just talking. These changes are subtle to an outsider's eye, but I feel them in almost every family conversation. We can argue about trivial matters, disagree. But now it's not about fighting for status. It's about the desire to understand. Dad, as he promised, has begun helping young entrepreneurs, advising them, supporting them. He has even come to the schools where we implement our programs a few times. I saw how he talks to kids from simple families, and his eyes light up just like they used to when he met with me in childhood. Mom signed up as a volunteer at a support fund for the elderly. At first, it was unfamiliar for her, but I see that now she proudly talks about it to acquaintances, though not long ago she looked down on such things. Victoria unexpectedly started taking on pro bono cases for families who can't afford a lawyer, in addition to her corporate career. Alexander began to work with a charity fund, helping people recover after serious injuries for free. I would have never thought such a change was possible, but here it is before me. Sometimes Mom and I sit in the kitchen, just drinking tea, without disputes, reproaches, or conversations about other people's successes. Victoria can call me and ask for work advice, not out of envy, but because she genuinely values my opinion. Alexander messages me in the evenings, sharing stories, asking about children's books for his son, discussing news. Even our rare family trips to the dacha have become different. Now it's not a competition over who brought better shashlik or who has a bigger greenhouse. Now we can just equally tend to the beds, laugh, argue about politics or movies, and no one tries to humiliate the other. One day I caught Mom telling a neighbor how proud she is of me. I stood behind the door and heard her say, My Catherine is smart. She has achieved so much and never boasts about it. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I no longer hide who I am and what I do. I have stopped being afraid to be myself with all my fears, mistakes, and successes. We, Dad and I, have opened a small fund. We support school students, organize courses, and offer internships for students from the provinces. Now Dad is proud not of the number of apartments he owns, but of the fact that someone got accepted to school thanks to our support. Sometimes we argue, fight, make up, but now there's no malice in that. I see that my family members are genuinely trying to become better. I myself have become more forgiving of others' mistakes. I have learned to ask for forgiveness and to say, I love you, without embarrassment and without thinking it reflects weakness. Life still has its challenges. There are days when doubts overwhelm me again, when it seems that all these changes are fragile and unreliable. But now I know that even if something breaks, I have support, and that's what matters most. I often recall that night at the restaurant, how I was pushed out the door, how I felt like an outsider. Then it seemed to me that nothing would change anymore. But life is a marvelous thing. Sometimes you have to go through pain and humiliation to encounter real warmth and understand that family can take many forms. The main thing is that it holds honesty, respect, and a bit of love. I look at my parents, at Victoria and Alexander, and realize each of us had the chance to not truly see each other. Yet we took a step toward each other, and that means it wasn't in vain. I live truly. I am finally among my own.